How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, January 3rd, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to review the Elite matchups and performances that took place yesterday on Sunday, January 2nd. Taking a quick step back and looking at where we are still in the first week of the 2022 calendar year. Starting with football, the college football season is coming to a close. There's only one more bowl game left before the College Football National Championship next week. And then taking a look at what's going on with the NFL. Yesterday was the second to last Sunday of the regular season. After tonight's game, there's only 1 week left for every team that is involved. And then taking a look at what's going on in basketball. We are approaching the midway point for the college basketball season and also the midway point for the pro season, just to get a sense of where we are at this point. And not to mention that because we are at the very top of the 2022 year, we are also entering the second week, or we're also entering the second half of the soccer season, as we are now in the January portal window for soccer as well. With that said, taking a look at what went down at the collegiate ranks, starting off with college basketball, looking to see what happened with the 10th ranked team in the nation, the Michigan State Spartans went to Chicago to face off against the unranked Northwestern Wildcats. Michigan State would end up beating Northwestern 73-67. The 10th ranked team beat Northwestern by 6 after they outscored Northwestern by 13 points in the second half to overcome their 7-point deficit. On the winning end of this matchup, the Michigan State Spartans were led by their starting forward, Gabe Brown, out of Ypsilanti, Michigan. He would go on to finish with 20 points in 2 blocks in 33 minutes. He shot 5 for 11 from the field, 3 for 7 from 3, and a perfect 7 for 7 from the line. With this win, the 10th ranked Michigan State Spartans are now 12-2 on the year. They are 3-0 in the Big Ten. With this loss, the unranked Northwestern Wildcats are now 8-3. They are now 1-1 in the Big Ten. Taking a look at what went down with the 12th ranked team in the nation, the Houston Cougars faced off against the unranked Temple Owls in Philly. Houston would end up beating Temple 66-61. They won this matchup by 5 after outscoring Temple by 11 in the first half. On the winning end of this matchup, the Houston Cougars were led in scoring by their starting senior out of Texas, Fabian White Jr. He would go on to finish with 15 points, 14 rebounds, and 2 blocks in 38 minutes. He shot 6 for 14 from the field and a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. And last but not least, taking a look at the 13th ranked college basketball team in the nation, the Ohio State Buckeyes went to Nebraska to face off against the unranked Cornhuskers. Ohio State would go on to beat Nebraska 87-79 in overtime. They outscored them 15-7 in that period. On the winning end of this matchup, the 13th ranked Buckeyes were led in scoring by their starting guard out of Columbus, their freshman Malachi Branham. He finished with 35 points and 6 rebounds in 43 minutes. He shot 13 for 19 from the field, 6 for 10 from 3, and 3 for 4 from the foul line. With this win, the 13th ranked Ohio State Buckeyes are 9-2. They are now 3-0 in the Big Ten. With this loss, the unranked Nebraska Cornhuskers are 6-8. They are 0-3 in the Big Ten. Taking a look now at what went down in the NFL in yesterday's games, considering there were no Thursday games leading up, so they had almost all of their teams except for one playing, so they had 15 matchups. Starting off in Buffalo, the Bills hosted the Atlanta Falcons. The Buffalo Bills would end up beating the Falcons 29-15. The Falcons outscored the Bills 15-14 in the first half. The Bills would go on to shut the Falcons out 15-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Falcons were led by their quarterback, Matt Ryan. He threw for 197 yards and ran for 7. That's 204 total yards of offense. The Falcons' elite tight end Kyle Pitts would finish with 2 receptions for 69 yards, as he was the team's leading receiver on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, the Falcons were led in tackles by Foyesade Olakun. He would go on to finish with 13 on the day, and then he would also go on to finish with an 18-yard interception, as well as A.J. Terrell, who also had 7 tackles and a sack for himself. Deron Harmon would finish with the 3rd interception of the day, as he had 5 of them. On the winning end of this matchup, the Buffalo Bills were led by their elite starting quarterback, Josh Allen, out of Wyoming. He would go on to complete 11 of his 26 passes, as he threw for 120 yards and 3 interceptions. He also ran for 81 yards on the ground as both of his touchdowns came on the ground. So he had 201 total yards of offense alongside his 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher, Devin Singletary, had 23 carries for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their elite wide receiver, Stephon Diggs, would lead the team in receiving as he had 5 receptions for 52 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, their elite linebacker, Tremaine Edmonds, would lead the team in tackles as he had 7 of them. And with this win, the Buffalo Bills are now 10-6 on the season. They are tied with the New England Patriots for the best record in the AFC East with one last game to go. And with this loss, the Atlanta Falcons are now 7-9. That is the third worst record in the NFC South at this very moment. With this win, the Buffalo Bills are one of 5 teams that have clinched a playoff spot in the AFC. And with this loss, the Atlanta Falcons are officially out of the playoff race as it stands at the moment. And of course, taking a look at what went down in Chicago, the Bears hosted the New York Giants. The Chicago Bears would end up beating the New York Giants 29-3. They outscored the Giants 22-3 in the first half before shutting them out 7-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Giants were led by their starting quarterback, Mike Glennon. He threw for 24 yards and 2 interceptions, and he also had 13 yards on the ground. That's 37 total yards of offense. Their elite running back, Saquon Barkley, finished with 21 carries for 102 yards on the ground. And on the defensive side of the ball, the Giants were led in tackles by Leonard Williams out of USC. He would go on to finish with 8 tackles on the day. The team would have 2 interceptions. Tay Crowder would finish with 6 tackles as he had an interception for himself. James Bradbury had the other interception for the New York Giants as he only had a tackle as well. On the winning end of this matchup, the Chicago Bears were led by their starting quarterback, Andy Dalton. Dalton threw for 173 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, and he also ran for 14 yards. That's 187 total yards of offense. And of course, their leading rusher was David Montgomery. He had 22 carries for 64 yards as he had both of the team's rushing touchdowns on the ground. He also had 2 receptions for 17 yards. That's 81 total yards of offense. The Bears' leading receiver was Darnell Mooney. He had 7 receptions for 69 yards and the team's lone receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Roquan Smith would finish with the team high in tackles as he had 9 of them. Travis Gibson would finish with 3 tackles as he had 2 of the team's 4 sacks. Tashawn Gibson and Deion Bush would finish with both of the team's interceptions as Deion Bush had finished with 3 tackles alongside his interception, and Tashawn Gibson had 2 tackles. With this win, the Chicago Bears are now 6-10. That is the 3rd best record in the NFC North, and they are officially eliminated from the playoff hunt. And taking a look at how the Giants fared with this loss, they are now 4-12. That is the worst record in the NFC East. And of course, as a result, the New York Giants are one of 14 teams that have already been eliminated from the playoffs alongside the Chicago Bears and the Falcons, like I just named. Jumping out to Cincinnati, the Bengals hosted the reigning AFC champs Kansas City Chiefs. The Bengals beat the Chiefs 34-31. The Chiefs outscored the Bengals 28-17 in the first half. The Bengals would outscore the Chiefs 17-3 in the second half as they came into the fourth quarter trailing. They would take the lead off of a 5-yard touchdown pass from Joe Burrow to Tyler Boyd. Kansas City would kick a field goal to tie it up with 6 minutes, and then the Bengals would win the game with the last play of the game being a field goal from Evan McPherson from 20 yards out. On the losing end of this matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs were led by their elite starting quarterback, Patrick Mahomes out of Texas Tech. He would go on to complete 26 of his 37 passes as he threw for 259 yards and 2 touchdowns. He would also run for 25 yards on the ground. That's 284 total yards of offense. Kansas City's leading rusher, Darrell Williams, had 14 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 19 receiving yards through the air. That would go on to be 107 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, the Chiefs were led in tackles by Anthony Hitchens. He had 9 of them. Their elite defensive tackle, Chris Jones, finished with 4 tackles on the day as he had 2 of the team's 4 sacks. On the winning end of this matchup, the Cincinnati Bengals were led by their starting quarterback, former number 1 overall pick, Joe Burrow. Burrow would throw for 446 yards and 4 touchdowns. He would also run for 46 yards, as that is 492 total yards of offense. And then through the air, their elite rookie wide receiver, Jamar Chase would finish with 11 receptions for 266 yards and 3 of the team's 4 receiving touchdowns. Their leading rusher, Joe Mixon, had 12 carries for 46 yards. He also had 7 receptions for 40 yards. That's 86 total yards of offense for him. On the defensive side of the ball, Chidobe Awuzie would lead the Bengals in tackles as he had 10 of them. All of them were solo tackles. And with this win, the Cincinnati Bengals are now 10-6. That is the best record in the AFC North. They are one of 5 teams in the AFC to clinch a playoff spot as they are currently holding on to that 3 seed with the same record as the Bills, but I believe they own the tiebreaker. And of course, on the losing end of this matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs are now 11-5. That is the best record in the AFC West. They are tied with the Tennessee Titans for the best records in the AFC, but right now they are holding on to that 2nd seed at the moment. And like I said, they are one of 5 teams in the AFC that have clinched a playoff spot with 1 more week to go. Jumping out to Indianapolis, which is 1 state over, the Indianapolis Colts hosted the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders would end up beating the Colts 23-20 after the Raiders outscored the Colts 13-10 in the first half. Both teams would score 10 in the second half. The Colts would tie the game up with a field goal with 2 minutes left, and then the Raiders would win the game with a field goal on the last play of the game to, of course, keep their playoff hopes alive. On the losing end of this matchup, the Indianapolis Colts were led by their starting quarterback, Carson Wentz. He threw for 148 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 10 yards. That's 158 yards of offense. Their elite running back out of Wisconsin, Jonathan Taylor, would finish with 20 carries for 108 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 6 yards through the air, so that's 114 total yards of offense. Their leading tackler on the defensive end was Bobby Okereke as he finished with 10 tackles on the day. And also their 3rd leading tackler, Darius Leonard, their elite linebacker, finished with 7 tackles on the day as he finished with one of the team's 2 interceptions. The other interception will go to Isaiah Rogers. Isaiah Rogers would go on to finish with 4 tackles for himself. On the winning end of this matchup, the Las Vegas Raiders were led by their starting quarterback, Derek Carr. He threw for 255 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was their elite running back, Josh Jacobs. He had 16 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 17 receiving yards through the air. That is, of course, 81 total yards of offense. 80 yards of total offense. Their leading receiver, Zay Jones, had 8 receptions for 120 yards. Their second leading receiver, Hunter Renfrow, had 7 receptions for 76 yards in the team's lone receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Davine Diablo finished with 9 tackles leading the team. With this win, the Las Vegas Raiders are now 9-7. They are tied with the Chargers for the 2nd best record in the AFC West. And as of right now, they have not clinched a playoff seed, and right now they are sitting on the bubble on the outside looking in as everything looks at the moment. And of course, with this loss, the Indianapolis Colts are now 9-7. They are one of the teams that are in the hunt, as they have the same record as the Raiders, but they are actually sitting ahead of the Raiders in the AFC playoff standings. But neither team has clinched the playoffs because the Raiders beat the Colts yesterday. Taking a look at what went down in Boston, the New England Patriots hosted the Jacksonville Jaguars from within their own division. The Patriots would end up beating the Jaguars 50-10. They outscored the Jags 28-3 in the first half before outscoring them 22-7 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Jacksonville Jaguars were led by their elite young starting quarterback, the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft, Trevor Lawrence. He would go on to complete 17 of his 27 passes as he threw for 193 yards, a touchdown, and 3 interceptions. He would go on to run for 16 yards. That's 209 total yards of offense. And on the defensive side of the ball, through the air, Laquan Treadwell will be the team's leading receiver as he had 6 receptions for 87 yards. On the defensive side of the ball for the Jags, their leading tackler was Chris Claybrooks. He finished with 9 tackles on the day. On the defensive side, or on the winning end of this matchup, the New England Patriots were led by their first-round quarterback from last year's draft, Mac Jones out of Alabama. Jones would throw for 227 yards and 3 touchdowns, as he also ran for 12 yards. That's 239 total yards of offense. Ramondre Stevenson would be the Patriots' leading rusher, as he had 19 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their second leading rusher, Damian Harris, would go on to finish with 9 carries for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 12 receiving yards through the air. That's 47 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Kendrick Bournes. He had 5 receptions for 76 yards on the day. Their second leading receiver, Jacoby Myers, had 8 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. Their third leading receiver, Christian Wilkerson, had 4 receptions for 42 yards as he had 2 receiving touchdowns. On the winning end of this matchup, the Patriots' leading tacklers were J.C. Jackson, Kyle Van Noy, Adrian Phillips, and Jalen Mills. Each of those players had 4 tackles on the day. And looking at the players that had interceptions, Miles Bryant, who went to high school and sat in class, and he finished with 3 tackles on the day. He would finish with one of the team's interceptions on his 24th birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, Miles. Kyle Duggar will go on to finish with an interception for himself as he had 2 tackles alongside it. And J.C. Jackson, as well as leading the team in tackles with 4, will go on to finish with one of the team's 3 interceptions. With this win, the New England Patriots are now 10-6. They are tied with the Buffalo Bills for the best record in the AFC East. They are one of 5 teams in the AFC that have clinched a playoff spot in just their second year of not having Tom Brady. Of course, Bill Belichick has done it again. And taking a look at where the Jaguars fare. With this loss, the Jaguars are now 2-14. They are one of 14 teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention. As of right now, they are holding the worst record in football, and if they lose next week, they will be the team that holds the very first pick in the 2022 NFL draft. So that's how that looks. Taking a look at taking a look at what went down in New York within the same division. The New York Jets hosted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the Buccaneers would beat the Jets 28-24. The Jets outscored the Buccaneers 17-10 in the first half before the Buccaneers outscored the Jets 18-7 in the second half. Not to mention, this is also the game where Antonio Brown would end up leaving the game. I have no idea as to whether he's coming back, and Bruce Arians, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coach, said he's not coming back, so that's how that situation looks. But on the losing end of this matchup, the New York Jets were led by their first-round pick quarterback, Zach Wilson, out of BYU, the number 2 overall pick from last year's draft. He would go on to throw for 234 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver, Braxton Berrios, would go on to finish with 8 receptions for 65 yards and the team's lone receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, going back to their rushers. Ty Johnson, their third leading rusher and second leading receiver, he had 5 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown. He also had 3 receptions for 47 yards on the day. He will go on to finish with 82 total yards of offense with his touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, their linebacker out of Alabama led the team in tackles. C.J. Mosley had 13 of them. And then Brandon Eagles would finish with the team's lone interception as he finished with 4 tackles. On the winning end of this matchup, the Buccaneers were led by their goated starting quarterback, Tom Brady. He would complete 34 of his 50 passes as he threw for 410 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading receiver was Rob Gronkowski. He had 7 receptions for 115 yards. And their second leading receiver, Cyril Grayson, had 6 receptions for 81 yards as he had a receiving touchdown. Their elite wide receiver, Mike Evans, would finish with 4 receptions for 47 yards as he had a receiving touchdown for himself. On the defensive side of the ball, the Buccaneers were led in tackles by Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield Jr. They both finished with 8 tackles on the day. With this win, the defending Super Bowl champs Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now 12-4. That is the best record in the NFC South for the time being, and they are one of 6 teams that have clinched a playoff spot in the NFC. Right now, they are holding on to the 3 seed as all things stand. They have the same record as the Rams, but the Rams are sitting right ahead of them in the seeding. With this loss, the New York Jets are now 4-12. They are one of 14 teams that have not qualified for the playoffs, as they currently hold the worst record in the AFC East. And then, of course, they are sitting alongside the Texans and the New York Giants, as they could possibly see themselves. They are right now in position for a top 5 pick in this year's upcoming draft. Taking a look at what went down in Nashville, the Tennessee Titans hosted the Miami Dolphins. The Titans would shellac the Dolphins 34-3. They outscored the Dolphins 17-3 in the first half before shutting them out 17-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Miami Dolphins were led by their elite young starting quarterback out of Alabama, Tua Tagovailoa. He would complete 18 of his 38 passes as he threw for 205 yards and an interception. He also ran for a yard. The Dolphins' leading rusher, Duke Johnson, had 49 yards on the ground and 16 yards to the air, as he would go on to finish with 68 total yards of or he would go on to finish with 65 total yards of offense. Their leading tackler on the defensive end was Christian Wilkins. He had 11 tackles on the day. And on the winning end of this matchup, the Tennessee Titans were led by their starting quarterback, Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill would throw for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 7 yards. That's 127 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was Deontay Foreman. He had 26 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And on the defensive side of the ball, Zach Cunningham and Imani Hooker would finish with 6 tackles on the day. And David Long Jr. would go on to finish with an interception, as he finished with 4 tackles on the day. With this win, the Tennessee Titans are now 11-5, and with this loss, the Miami Dolphins are now 8-8 on the season. Taking a look now at what went down in Washington, the Washington football team hosted the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles would beat Washington 20-16. The Eagles would get outscored 16-7 in the first half before the Eagles shut out Washington 13-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this match, and of course, looking at how the Eagles would go on to take the lead, they took the lead in the fourth quarter, they would end up kicking 2 field goals. The first field goal with 12 minutes left would be what they needed to take the lead, and then they kicked a field goal with 2.5 minutes left to put themselves a little bit further out. On the losing end of this matchup, Washington was led by their starting quarterback, Taylor Heineke. Heineke threw for 247 yards and an interception. He also ran for 14 yards. That is 261 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Jared Patterson, would finish with 12 carries for 57 yards as he had a touchdown on the ground. He also had 41 yards through the air. That is 98 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Washington was led in tackles by Cole Holcomb. He had 11 on the day. Cameron Curl would finish with 10 tackles himself. And then on the winning end of this matchup, the Philadelphia Eagles were led by their starting quarterback, former Heisman winner Jalen Hurts out of Oklahoma. He would go on to throw for 214 yards and run for 44. That's 258 total yards of offense. The Eagles' leading rusher, Boston Scott, had 14 carries for 47 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had 39 yards through the air. That is 86 total yards of offense with his 2 touchdowns. Their leading tackler on the defensive end was TJ Edwards. He would go on to finish with 13 tackles on the day, leading the team. Josh Sweat, their defensive end, finished with 5 tackles as he had a sack and a half. And then Rodney McLeod would lead the team, who had the team's lone interception, as he had 5 tackles for himself. Not to mention, back on the offensive side, that their elite wide receiver, Devontae Smith, finished with 3 receptions for 54 yards. With this win, the Philadelphia Eagles are now 9-7. They are tied, or no, they're not tied. They have the second best record in the NFC East as of right now. They are currently one of the 6 teams that have clinched a spot in the playoffs with this record, as there are no longer any more teams that are really competing for that. Or there's still other teams that are competing for that last spot, but the Eagles were able to earn their way in. And on the other end, with this loss, the Washington football team is now 6-10. That is the 3rd best record in the NFC East, and they are one of 14 teams on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. If the season were to end today, they would have the 9th pick in the draft. Taking a look now at what went down in Baltimore, the Ravens hosted the LA Rams. As the Ravens had a playoff spot on the line, the Rams would end up beating the Ravens 20-19. The Ravens outscored the Rams 13-7 in the first half before the Rams outscored the Ravens 13-6 in the second. The Rams would end up winning this game with a minute left to go off of a game-winning touchdown pass from Matt Stafford to Odell Beckham Jr. from 7 yards out. They would fail the 2-point conversion, but the Ravens would not be able to drive the ball down the field and score. On the losing end of this matchup, the Baltimore Ravens were led by their starting quarterback for the day, Tyler Huntley, out of Utah. Huntley would throw for 197 yards and an interception. He also ran for 54 yards. That's 251 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher out of Florida State, Devontae Freeman, finished with 14 carries for 76 yards on the ground. He also had a receiving yard through the air. Their tight end, Mark Andrews, finished with 6 receptions for 89 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Tavon Young finished with 9 tackles on the day. Chuck Clark would finish with 2 interceptions, as one of them was returned for a pick 6. He also had 7 tackles. On the winning end of this matchup, the LA Rams were led by their starting quarterback out of Georgia, Matt Stafford. Stafford would throw for 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Sony Michel out of Georgia. Michel would have 19 carries for for 74 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 25 yards through the air, so that's 99 total yards of offense. The Rams' leading receiver, Cooper Kupp, will go on to finish with 6 receptions for 95 yards and a touchdown as well. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Troy Reeder would finish with 10 tackles, leading the team as he had a sack. Their elite defensive end, Von Miller, would finish with 5 tackles as he had 2 sacks on the day as well. And also going into their secondary, Jordan Fuller would finish with an interception. Their go-to defensive tackle, Aaron Donald, would finish with 5 tackles as he had half of a sack. With this win, the LA Rams are now 12-4. They have the best record in the NFC West for the time being, and they're holding on to the 2nd seed in the NFC playoff picture as they have the same record as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now. With this loss, the Baltimore Ravens are now 8-8. They are still officially in the bubble with 1 week left, as a win could possibly see them make the playoffs. I'm not sure if Lamar Jackson's going to come back for this last game, but considering they're still in the hunt, their next game is a must-win, as they currently hold the 2nd best record in the AFC North behind the Cincinnati Bengals. Taking a look now what's going on in LA, the LA Chargers hosted the Denver Broncos. The Chargers were able to beat the Broncos 34-13 to keep their playoff hopes alive. The Chargers outscored the Broncos 17-3 in the first half before outscoring them 17-10 in the second half. As looking at how the Broncos fared on the losing end, they were led by their starting quarterback out of Missouri, Drew Lock. Drew Lock threw for 245 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 10 yards as 255 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was their tight end out of Iowa, Noah Fant. He finished with 6 receptions for 92 yards and the team's lone receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Micah Kiser and Jonas Griffith would lead the team in tackles, as they each would finish with 12 of them. On the winning end of this matchup, the LA Chargers were led by their elite young quarterback, Justin Herbert out of Oregon. Herbert would complete 22 of his 31 passes as he threw for 237 yards and 2 touchdowns. He would also run for 2 yards as he had 239 total yards of offense. Austin Eckler would finish with 17 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown as he had 54 yards through the air. That's 112 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Mike Williams. He had 3 receptions for 63 yards and he would finish with a touchdown on the day. Kazir White would finish with 11 tackles on the day, leading the Chargers defense in tackles. And with this win, the LA Chargers are now 9-7. With this loss, the Denver Broncos are now 7-9 on the season. The Chargers are still in the hunt. As of right now, if the playoffs were to end, or if the season were to end today, the Chargers would be in the playoffs. But of course, they have one more game left to play. As a win here a win in their next game would clinch a playoff spot for them. On the losing end, the Denver Broncos are one of 14 teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention. Right now, if the season were to end today, they would go into the summer with the 10th overall pick. Taking a look now at what went down in San Francisco, the 49ers hosted the Houston Texans. The 49ers would end up beating the Texans 23-7. The Texans outscored the Niners 7-3 in the first half. The Niners, however, would shut the Texans out 20-0 in the second half. On the losing end, Davis Mills would lead the Texans' passing game as he threw for 163 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He also ran for 4 yards. That's 167 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Rex Burkhead, had 47 yards on the ground and 32 yards on the ground, or 32 yards through the air. That's 79 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver, Brandon Cooks, had 7 receptions for 66 yards and the team's lone receiving touchdown. Houston's leading tackler was Christian Kirksey. He would finish with 9 of them on the day. Desmond King II, their corner out of Iowa, would finish with 8 tackles and the team's lone interception. On the winning end of this matchup, the 49ers were led by their first-round pick in last year's draft, Trey Lance, now that Jimmy Garoppolo is hurt. Trey Lance would throw for 249 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He also ran for 31 yards. That's 280 total yards of offense for him. San Francisco's leading rusher was Elijah Mitchell. He had 21 carries for 119 yards on the ground. He also had 2 receptions for 11 yards as he had a receiving touchdown touchdown through the air. Mitchell will go on to finish with 130 yards of offense for San Francisco. Their leading receiver, Brandon Ayuk, finished with 4 receptions for 94 yards. Their second leading receiver, Deebo Samuel, out of South Carolina, would finish with 3 receptions for 63 yards and a receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, the Niners starting linebacker, Fred Warner, would finish with 15 tackles, leading the game in them. Marcel Harris would finish with 10 of them. And, of course, in the secondary, Marcel Harris would go on to finish with the team's lone interception as he had 10 tackles. With this win, the San Francisco 49ers are 9-7. That is the third best record in the NFC West. But the 49ers are still in the hunt. If the playoffs were to start today, they would be in. As of right now, the only team that they are left to compete with for the last playoff spot in the NFC is the New Orleans Saints. With this loss, the Houston Texans are now 4-12. And of course, with this loss, they are, of course, eliminated from playoff contention. But if the playoffs were to start today, they would have the third pick in the NFL draft, just to get a sense of how their season is coming to an end. Taking a look at what went down in Dallas, the Cowboys hosted the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals would end up beating the Cowboys 25-22 to keep their playoff hopes alive. The Cardinals would outscore the Cowboys 13-7 in the first half, and the Cowboys outscored the Cardinals 15-12 in the second half. Looking at how this game would come to an end, the Cowboys would score a touchdown with 4 minutes left, but it just wouldn't be enough, as the Cardinals have been able to keep themselves at an arm's length for a good amount of this time. On the losing end of this matchup, the Dallas Cowboys were led by their starting quarterback, Dak Prescott. He threw for 226 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 20 yards. That's 246 total yards of offense. The Cowboys' leading tackler on the defensive end was Leighton Vander Esch out of Boise State, I believe. He would finish with 10 tackles on the day. And on the winning end of this matchup, the Arizona Cardinals were led by their elite starting quarterback, the only player to be taken in the first round of the NFL and the MLB draft, Kyler Murray. He would go on to complete 26 of his 38 passing attempts as he threw for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns. Murray also ran the ball for 44 yards. That's 307 total yards of offense for him. Their leading receiver, Christian Kirk, would go on to finish with 6 receptions for 74 yards on the day. Their leading rusher, Chase Edmonds, had 53 yards on the ground and 29 yards through the air. That would combine for 82 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, the Cardinals were led in tackles by Isaiah Simmons. He would finish with 10 of them. Their elite safety, Budda Baker, would finish with 3 tackles as he had the team's lone sack. With this win, the Arizona Cardinals are 11-5. That is the second best record in the NFC West, and they are one of 6 teams that have clinched a playoff spot as they are holding on to that top wildcard spot for the time being. With this loss, the Dallas Cowboys are now 11-5. The same record. They still hold the best record in the NFC East as they are holding on to that 4th seed in the NFC playoff picture. If the playoffs were to start today, their first matchup would be the Arizona Cardinals. Taking a look now at what went down in New Orleans, the Saints hosted the Carolina Panthers. The Saints were able to beat the Panthers 18-10. The Panthers outscored the Saints 10-9 in the first half, and the Saints would shut the Panthers out 9-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Carolina Panthers were led by their starting quarterback out of USC, Sam Darnold. Darnold threw for 132 yards and an interception. He also ran for 7 yards. That's 139 yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Chuba Hubbard, finished with 17 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 13 receiving yards through the air. That is 68 total yards of offense for Carolina. On the defensive side of the ball, their leading tackler was Frankie Louvu. He finished with 9 tackles on the day. And then on the winning end of this matchup, the New Orleans Saints were led by their starting quarterback, Taysom Hill. Hill would throw for 222 yards and a touchdown. He was also the team's leading rusher. He had 45 yards on the ground. That would be 267 total yards of offense. Their second leading rusher, Alvin Kamara, their elite running back, had 13 carries for 32 yards on the ground. He had 5 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown through the air. He finished with exactly 100 yards of offense and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, their elite defensive end, Cameron Jordan, would finish with 8 tackles as he had 3.5 sacks on the day. The team would go on to combine for 7 of them. And then, of course, C.J. Gardner-Johnson would finish with the team's lone interception. With this win, the New Orleans Saints are now 8-8. That is the second best record in the NFC South. They are still outside of the playoff picture looking in, as their next win or their next game has to be a win in order for them to at least have a chance to make it into the playoffs. And on the losing end of this matchup, the Carolina Panthers are now 5-11. That is the worst record in the NFC South. They are one of 14 teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention. If the season were to end after today, they would go into the draft with the 6th overall pick. Taking a look at what went down in Seattle now, the Seahawks hosted the Detroit Lions. The Seahawks would end up beating the Lions 51-29. They outscored the Lions 31-7 in the first half before the Lions outscored them 22-20 in the second half. Just to get a sense. And on the losing end of this matchup, the Detroit Lions were led by their starting quarterback for the day, Tim Boyle. He would throw for 262 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. He also ran for 14 yards. That's 276 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He finished with 8 receptions for 111 yards and a receiving touchdown. Their second leading receiver, Kadarius Hodge, had 5 receptions for 76 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Tracy Walker III was their leading tackler. Their linebacker their safety out of Louisiana would finish with 12 tackles he would finish with the team high and the most in the game. On the winning end of this matchup, the Seattle Seahawks were led by their elite starting quarterback, last year's Walter Payton Man of the Year, Russell Wilson. He would complete 20 of his 29 pass attempts as he threw for 236 yards and 4 touchdowns. He would also run the ball for 24 yards, and that would combine for 260 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Rashad Penny, finished with 25 carries for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He would also finish with 15 yards through the air. That's 185 total yards of offense. Their elite wide receiver, DK Metcalf, finished with 6 receptions for 63 yards and 3 of the team's 4 receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, Jordan Brooks led the Seahawks in tackles as he had 10 of them. And then DJ Reed, their second leading tackler, would finish with 8 tackles as he finished with 2 interceptions. Ugo Amadi would finish with the team's third interception, as he would go on to, of course, finish with 2 tackles, and he also fumbled it as well. But with this win, the Seattle Seahawks are now 6-10. That is the worst record in the NFC West. And with this loss, the Detroit Lions are 2-13-1. That is the worst record in the NFC North. Following this matchup, neither of these teams is in playoff positioning, as they are 2 of the 14 teams that will have to wait until next season to see if they have a chance to make the playoffs. Last but not least, taking a look at last night's Sunday Night Football matchup, the Green Bay Packers hosted the Minnesota Vikings, and the Packers would end up beating the Vikings 37-10, as the Packers would go on to outscore the Vikings 20-3 in the first half before outscoring the Vikings 17-7 in the second. On the losing end of this matchup, the Minnesota Vikings were led by their starting quarterback, Sean Mannion. Mannion would throw for 189 yards and a touchdown, as he also ran for 14. The Oregon State quarterback would combine for 203 total yards of offense with his passing touchdown. Their second leading receiver was KJ Osborne, as he had 3 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver out of LSU, Justin Jefferson. He had 6 receptions for 58 yards. On the defensive side of this matchup, their leading tacklers were Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr. Their linebackers out of UCLA, they both finished with 9. On the winning end of this matchup, the Green Bay Packers were led by their goated starting quarterback out of Cal, Aaron Rodgers. He completed 29 of his 38 passes as he threw for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 8 yards. That's 296 total yards of offense. Their elite running back, Aaron Jones, had 8 carries for 76 yards on the ground. He also had 5 receptions for 30 yards through the air. That's 106 total yards of offense. Their second leading rusher, A.J. Dillon, finished with 14 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 20 yards through the air. That's 83 total yards of offense. The Green Bay Packers' elite wide receiver Devontae Adams would lead the team in receiving, as he had 11 receptions for 136 yards and a touchdown. Allen Lazard had 6 receptions for 72 yards, as he had a touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Devondre Campbell finished with 8 tackles on the day. And then with this win, the Green Bay Packers are now 13-3. That is the best record in the NFC North, as they have already clinched a playoff spot. As of right now, they have the best record in the NFL, and they're holding on to that number one spot and hopefully a first-round bye. If they win this next game, they will go into the playoffs with a first-round bye. And then on the losing end of this matchup, the Minnesota Vikings are now 7-9. They are one of the 14 teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention, as they hold the second-best record in the NFC North. That is what the NFL is looking like as we go into today's one matchup. Today's Monday night matchup will feature the 7-1 Pittsburgh Steelers and the 7-8 Cleveland Browns. Both of these teams are still in the hunt, as I imagine, or I guess the Steelers are still in the hunt. The Browns are officially out. This is a must-win game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and of course, the Cleveland Browns. Considering they beat the Steelers last year, I wouldn't put it past the Cleveland Browns to completely upset and end the Steelers season tonight. But of course, we will have to wait and see and find out. Taking a look at what went down in the NBA yesterday, starting north of the border in Toronto, the Toronto Raptors hosted the New York Knicks. The Raptors would end up beating the Knicks 120-105. The Raptors won this matchup by 15 after they outscored New York by 8 in the second quarter and by 11 in the third, by 19 in the middle two quarters. On the losing end of this matchup, the New York Knicks were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard out of France, Evan Fournier. Fournier finished with 20 points in 26 minutes as he shot 6 for 14 from the field, 4 for 10 from 3, and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Toronto Raptors were led by their starting shooting guard, Fred VanVleet. He finished with 35 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in 31 minutes. He shot 11 for 17 from the field, 7 for 13 from 3, and a perfect 6 for 6 from the foul line. Their starting power forward, Pascal Siakam, will go on to finish with 20 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 steals, and 6 turnovers in 34 minutes. He shot 7 for 15 from the field, and he shot 6 for 9 from the foul line. With this win, the Toronto Raptors are now 16-17. Taking a look at how it fares in the Eastern Conference, they are holding on to the 10th best record in the East. They sit half a game behind the 8th seed Washington Wizards for at least a playoff spot for the time being. And taking a look at how the New York Knicks are faring, with this loss, they are now 17-20. That is the 5th worst record in the Eastern Conference. They trail the Wizards by a game and a half for that 8th playoff spot for right now. Taking a look at what went down in Boston, the Celtics hosted the Orlando Magic, and in a game that went to overtime, the Celtics would win this matchup 116-111 after they had to outscore the Magic by 12 to tie the game in the fourth quarter. On the losing end of this matchup, the Orlando Magic were led in scoring by their shooting guard off the bench, Terrence Ross. He finished with 33 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 steals in 35 minutes. He shot 11 for 19 from the field, 4 for 8 from 3, and a perfect 7 for 7 from the foul line. Their starting shooting guard, Gary Harris, finished with 23 points and 4 steals, as well as fouling out in 43 minutes. He shot 9 for 16 from the field, and he shot 4 for 6 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Boston Celtics were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, their former All-Star out of Cal, Jaylen Brown. He finished with 50 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 blocks, as well as 7 turnovers in 46 minutes. He shot 19 for 29 from the field, 5 for 10 from 3, and 7 for 8 from the foul line. Also in their starting lineup, their starting point guard out of Germany, Dennis Schröder, will go on to finish with 21 points and 7 assists in 40 minutes as he shot 7 for 14 from the field, 2 for 5 from 3, and 5 for 7 from the foul line. With this win, the Boston Celtics are now 18-19. That is the 9th best record of the Eastern Conference. They sit half a game behind the 8th seed Washington Wizards as they sit outside the playoff picture for the time being. And with this loss, the Orlando Magic are now 7-30. That is the 2nd worst record in the East and the 2nd worst record in the NBA. They've lost their last 5 games and they've lost 8 of their last 10. They trailed the Washington Wizards by 11.5 games in the conference for the time being. Taking a look now at what's going on in Cleveland, the Cavaliers hosted their in-division rivals from one state over, the Indiana Pacers. The Cavs would end up beating the Pacers 108-104. The Cavs won this matchup by 4 as they had to outscore the Pacers by 4 in the middle 2 quarters. The first and fourth quarters are basically even. And the losing end of this matchup, the Indiana Pacers were led in scoring by their starting power forward out of Gonzaga, Domantas Sabonis. He finished with 32 points, 13 rebounds, and 7 assists in 39 minutes. He shot 10 for 16 from the field, 3 for 4 from 3, and 9 for 10 from the foul line. Their starting point guard, Dwayne Washington Jr. out of Ohio State, will go on to finish with 20 points in 34 minutes as he shot 8 for 17 from the field and 4 for 9 from 3. On the winning end of this matchup, the Cleveland Cavaliers were led in scoring by their starting center, their rookie Evan Mobley out of USC. He finished with 24 points and 9 rebounds, all in 35 minutes. He shot 11 for 16 from the field on the day. Off the bench, their power forward, Kevin Love, finished with 20 points and 8 rebounds in 29 minutes. He shot 6 for 13 from the field, 3 for 6 from 3, and he would shoot a perfect 5 for 5 from the foul line. With this win, the Cleveland Cavaliers are 21-16. That is the 5th best record in the Eastern Conference. They've won 6 of their last 10 games as they now sit 4.5 games behind the first seed Chicago Bulls in the conference. With this loss, the Indiana Pacers are now 14-23. That is the 3rd worst record in the Eastern Conference as they've lost their last 4 games. They've lost 7 of their last 10. They trailed the 8th seed Washington Wizards by 4.5 games for a playoff, or at least for a playoff seed. So they're not that far out. Taking a look at what went down in the capital of California, the Sacramento Kings hosted the Miami Heat. The Kings would end up beating the Heat 115-113 as they went into the fourth quarter tied. That difference would come down to a 2-point deficit in the fourth quarter. On the losing end of this matchup, the Miami Heat were led in scoring by their starting guard, Tyler Hero, and their starting center, Omar Yurtseven. Hero finished with 22 points and 5 rebounds in 35 minutes. He shot 8 for 23 from the field. He shot 4 for 11 from 3 and a perfect 2 for 2 from the line. Yurtseven finished with 22 points and 16 rebounds in 35 minutes. He shot 11 for 18 from the field. Their elite starting small forward out of Marquette, Jimmy Butler, finished with 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists in 36 minutes. He shot 9 for 22 from the field. He also shot 1 for 6 from 3 and a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Sacramento Kings were led in scoring by their shooting guard off the bench, Buddy Hield out of Oklahoma. He finished with 26 points and 6 rebounds in 33 minutes. He would go on to shoot 9 for 8 from the field, 7 for 4 from 3, and he made his only foul attempt of the day. And in their starting lineup, their point guard, De'Aaron Fox, would finish with 24 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals in 35 minutes. He shot 5 for 12 from the field and 14 for 15 from the foul line. With this win, the Sacramento Kings are now 16-22. That is the 10th best record in the Western Conference as they've won 5 of their last 10. They trail the 8th seed Dallas Mavericks by 3 games in the conference. With this loss, the Miami Heat are now 23-14. That is the 4th best record in the East. They've lost only 3 of their last 10. They trail the first seed Chicago Bulls by 2.5 games in the conference. Taking a look at what's going on in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Hornets hosted the Phoenix Suns. The Suns would end up beating the Hornets 133-99. They won this game by 34 after they outscored the Hornets by 17 in the second quarter, along with 9 in the first. They would go on to outscore them by 26 in the first half before outscoring the Hornets by 8 in the second. On the losing end of this matchup, the hometown Charlotte Hornets would be led in scoring by their elite starting point guard out of LA, LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball would go on to finish with 17 points in 23 minutes as he shot 5 for 12 from the field, 3 for 6 from 3, and 4 for 6 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Phoenix Suns were led in scoring by their elite starting shooting guard, Devin Booker. He finished with 24 points and 7 rebounds as well as 3 assists in 29 minutes. He shot 9 for 19 from the field, 3 for 9 from 3, and a perfect 3 for 3 from the foul line. Also in their starting lineup, their elite starting point guard out of Wake Forest, Chris Paul, would finish with 7 points, 6 rebounds, and 16 assists in 26 minutes. He shot 3 for 6 from the field and 1 for 3 from 3. With this win, the Phoenix Suns are now 28-8. That is the second best record in the Western Conference and the second best record in the NBA, as they are one of 2 teams with single-digit losses for the time being. They've won 7 of their last 10 games as they trail the first seed Golden State Warriors by half a game in the Western Conference. With this loss, the Charlotte Hornets are now 19-18. That is the 7th best record in the Eastern Conference as they've lost 5 of their last 10. They trail the first seed Chicago Bulls by 6.5 games in the conference for the time being. Taking a look at what's going down in Oklahoma City, the Thunder hosted the Dallas Mavericks from one state south. The Mavericks would end up beating the Thunder 95-86. They won this matchup by 9 after they outscored the Thunder by 12 in the first half. On the losing end, the Oklahoma City Thunder were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, their rookie out of Australia, Josh Giddey. He would go on to finish with 17 points, 13 rebounds, 14 assists, and 4 steals in 36 minutes. He shot 7 for 16 from the field and 3 for 5 from 3. On the winning end of this matchup, the Dallas Mavericks were led in scoring by their small forward and their small forwards off the bench. Tim Hardaway Jr. would go on to finish with 15 points in 24 minutes. He shot 5 for 11 from the field and a perfect 3 for 3 from 3. And then, of course, Marquise Chris would go on to finish with 15 points and 7 rebounds in 14 minutes. He shot 6 for 9 from the field and a perfect 3 for 3 from the foul line. The Mavericks' elite starting point guard out of Slovenia, Luka Doncic, would finish with 14 points, 9 rebounds, 10 assists, and 7 turnovers in 31 minutes. He shot 6 for 14 from the field and 2 for 6 from 3. With this win, the Dallas Mavericks are now 18-18. That is the 8th best record in the Western Conference. At the moment, they trail the first seed Golden State Warriors by 10.5 games in the conference. With this loss, the Oklahoma City Thunder are now 13-23. That is the 3rd worst record in the Western Conference. They've lost 5 of their last 10 games. They trail the 8th seed Dallas Mavericks by 5 games for that last playoff spot. Last but not least, taking a look at the game that took place in the Crypto.com arena, the Los Angeles Lakers would host and beat the Minnesota Timberwolves 108-103. They won this game by 5 after outscoring the Timberwolves by 7 in the fourth quarter. On the losing end of this matchup, the Timberwolves were led in scoring by their starting center, Naz Reid, out of LSU. He finished with 23 points and 11 rebounds in 30 minutes as he shot 10 for 17 from the field and 3 for 4 from the foul line. Their elite starting small forward, Anthony Edwards, their second-year player out of Georgia, would finish with 18 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and 8 turnovers in 38 minutes. He shot 7 for 19 from the field and 4 for 6 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the LA Lakers were led in scoring by their goated starting small forward, Lebron James, out of St. Vincent St. Mary High School. He would go on to finish with 26 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 steals in 39 minutes. He shot 7 for 15 from the field, 3 for 9 from 3, and 9 for 12 from the foul line. Their starting shooting guard, Malik Monk, finished with 22 points in 33 minutes as he shot 8 for 14 from the field, 4 for 9 from 3, and a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. Their elite starting point guard, Russell Westbrook, finished with 20 points, 3 rebounds, and 5 assists, as well as 9 turnovers and 5 fouls in 33 minutes. He shot 7 for 16 from the field and 6 for 8 from the foul line. With this win, the LA Lakers are now 19-19. That is the 7th best record in the Western Conference as they've won their last 2 games. They've won 4 of their last 10. They trail the Golden State Warriors by 10.5 games for the best record in the Western Conference. With this loss, the Minnesota Timberwolves are now 16-20. That is the 9th best record in the Western Conference as they've lost their last 3 games. They've lost 5 of their last 10. They sit 2 games behind the 8th seed Dallas Mavericks. That's how far out of the playoff picture they are. That is what the NBA picture is looking like as we go into today's matchups. And just looking through what's going on today, the 76ers are going to host the Rockets and the Wizards are going to host the Hornets at 7 o'clock. At 7:30, the Brooklyn Nets are going to host the Memphis Grizzlies, and that game's going to be on NBA TV. At 8 o'clock, the Chicago Bulls are going to host the Orlando Magic, as that's a top versus bottom matchup in the Eastern Conference. And then the Bucks are going to host the Detroit Pistons, as that's another top v bottom matchup in the East as well. Also, the New Orleans Pelicans are going to host the Utah Jazz in the Smoothie King Center. At 8:30, the Dallas Mavericks are going to host the Denver Nuggets, as Jokic and Doncic are going to face off against one another. At 10 o'clock on NBA TV, the Golden State Warriors are going to host the Miami Heat. At the same time, not on NBA TV, the Trailblazers are going to host the Atlanta Hawks. And the last game of the night tonight will be the LA Clippers hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Crypto.com arena. So that's how the NBA is shaping up after yesterday's performances. Taking a look at what went down in the world of soccer, starting off in the Premier League, Chelsea and Liverpool drew at 2. The first 2 goals would come from Liverpool's elite attacking wings, as Sadio Mane from Senegal will go on to finish with a 9th-minute goal. Mo Salah would score in the 26th minute, and that's, of course, how Liverpool usually tends to do it. And then taking a look at how Chelsea will go on to add to this scoring bit, their first goal would come in the 42nd minute from Mikhail Kovacic, and then their second goal will come in the 46th minute from their American forward, Christian Pulisic. Taking a look at how this draw shapes the Premier League, now that both teams have taken 1 point instead of their 3, Chelsea still sits second in the table with 10 less points than Man City. Liverpool has 1 less point than Chelsea, but Liverpool has 1 less game played, which gives them the slight advantage over Chelsea. So that's how that matchup is shaping up. Taking a look at what went down in La Liga in Spain, Atletico Madrid was able to beat Rayo Vallecano 2-0 as both of their goals came from Correa. Taking a look at how this shapes up La Liga, the reigning La Liga champs are now sitting 4th in the table as they trail first place Real Madrid by 14 points, and they sit 1 point ahead of 5th place Barcelona. Barcelona was able to beat Mallorca 1-0 as their lone goal came in the 44th minute from their Dutch forward Luke de Jong. And that is how yesterday's matchups are shaping up and how they're shaping soccer. Taking a look at how everything's going today, Manchester United is going to host Wolverhampton. Manchester United, taking a look at the Premier League, they are sitting 7th in the table. A win here could move them into the top 5, very possibly. And Wolverhampton is sitting with the 9th. They're sitting 9th in the table as they have 6 less points than Man U, and Man U's at home, which should give Man U the advantage. Taking a look at what's going down in the French Coupe de France in this round of 32 matchup, the lone one that's going to be played today, PSG is going to face off against Van OC. That matchup is going to be at 3:10. Of course, the winner of this goes to the round of 16. And that's everything that I have for you as we are going into today's matches for Monday, January 3rd, 2022. I want to thank the ESPN, the NCAA, NFL, NBA, and FIFA websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I needed for this episode, because without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 56 minutes of this piece, and I do apologize for butchering the names. I do plan on eventually getting them right. With that said, thanks once again for listening to this piece as we navigate through the world of sports one day at a time. I'm James Sims. This is The Elite, and once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I am going to come back tomorrow on Tuesday, January 4th for another episode. So until then, thanks for listening to my piece, and peace out. I'll catch you with more tomorrow.